Hello, everybody. I'm Jason Lebowitz, the founder of XXO, the platform built for connection to self first. We are restoring connection to humanity. We are transforming 1 million lives by 2025. Today's going to be quite an interesting conversation, and it's going to probably be a lot of trigger moments as well. We're going to be talking with Mandy Morris, a therapist. We're going to be talking about narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD. Mandy is a therapist, but also a survivor of NPD. And you're going to ask, how could that happen to a therapist? And that's going to show you just how toxic and dangerous this is. But also, we're going to talk about the relationship that we have with ourselves and connection to self. So, Mandy Morris, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, been looking forward to this. And I want to say off the bat that, you know, we're all just having conversation here. So please, if you have questions, if something pops into your mind that you want to know, you know, put it in the chat or, ask away and we'll definitely answer questions. Another thing too, whenever I talk really about any mental health thing, it is can be very triggering for people, especially if you are starting to resonate with something being said. If you at all feel anxious in this, there's one technique that I'm gonna show you right away to do, that if you start to get triggered at all. And so, Jason, I'm gonna have you do this with me. Actually, anyone watching should do this with me. So it's called the butterfly hug. You're gonna put your hands like this. Okay, you're gonna link your thumbs. Yep, rest it on your chest. You just alternate tapping back and forth. So if you at all get triggered, what this does is it activates the parasympathetic nervous system. You can focus on the tapping, take a deep breath. It's a really good little tool to have. It's a EMDR tool. So essentially, it activates both sides of the brain, gets you out of the anxiety side of the brain. Quick little thing you can do whenever you get triggered. So yeah, just want to throw that out there. So, part of my story is that I was in a 7-year marriage, and um, looking back, you can always see, oh, there were some traits there were some traits there, type of thing. But it's really different when you're in it. And he, towards the end of the marriage, when I finally was like, you've got to get help or I'm not coming home, all this stuff. He did get some official assessments done, and he had a major depressive disorder. It was between that, possibly bipolar. And he met all the criteria for narcissistic personality disorder. So and I want to be clear, because like narcissism and feel free to jump into and share anything you want to share as well, Jason, because I know we have some similar crossings in our stories. But narcissistic traits and NPD, they are different. People can have narcissistic traits and not the disorder. Narcissism kind of gets, it is a buzzword, like it kind of gets thrown out for anyone who's just like overly confident and kind of an asshole, like it's it that, oh, they're narcissists, and that's not, I mean, they may have some traits, sure, but that doesn't make them having the narcissistic personality disorder. So they are extremely hard to, like, everyone wants to know, well, how do I know if I'm dealing with a narcissist? It's really hard. This is not one of those, a lot of the things that make up a narcissist are things that you get to know about them over time, because they are so good at maintaining an image, which is part of narcissism. They have to maintain a certain image to people. So like when I met my ex, we were in college, and seemingly normal, very charming, yeah, like, just, it was like too good to be true, right? Which should have been red flag number one. And I am very much an empath. I feel, you know, and had those codependent tendencies, more so back then than now. And so it was kind of like the perfect magnet. But it wasn't till after we got married, I'd say about 6 months after, that things really started to flip. And it started off with little stuff like, you know, having anxiety about his job, you know, things like that. But when you put the pieces together over time, it was each job he would have, it the job felt too beneath him. And so there was always excuses or reasons why they, you know, he couldn't work for them because of whatever the reason was. He was in school to be a counselor at Georgia State University, and he dropped out of that because they didn't know what they were talking about. Like, this was the, like, really, you know, and you know, especially as a pretty newly married person, it's like you just want to be supportive. You want to, you know, you want to be there for them. And so, you know, a lot of yeah, I see Jill's comments. Yep. And a lot of that is just like trying to figure out how to make them happy, you know, like anything you want to do. So I mean, essentially, it turned into that getting worse and worse. Couldn't pay the bills. I was in grad school working a full-time job and trying to survive, essentially. And we had to move in. We eventually had to move in with his parents for a while. And it's so weird because there's like so many chunks that are I don't remember, except for the last few years. And so essentially, I'm gonna tell my story. Then I want to like really go into how to detect these, you know, narcissists, protect yourself and heal from them. So, you know, and after that, there was a lot of like, he'd always have these great ideas of like the type of job he would want to have. Like he wanted to, you know, write this world changing book, or he wanted to do these, and they were, I didn't realize it at the time. There were things that like maybe you could do, but it would be way out. And that was this like grandiose, you know, this fantasy of that he needed to be important. You know, he needed to be, you know, this guy who had this great job because that was part of his self-worth. And they were always very far-fetched things. And he even, it would come out that he would resent me for having my master's, for, you know, being a therapist, and then would use the switch from being more of a, you know, an overt narcissist to covert, where he was the victim to the world, you know, and I had to pay for his bad deal, essentially. And that would come out in a lot of verbal and emotional abuse type stuff. You know, if I asked him to help clean up, you know, because we had company coming over or something like that, like, F you, you know, I have a lot of things to do too. And I mean, it was just like constant language like that. And as it would get worse and worse, the tantrums would get worse and worse, right? And so, you know, he was never wrong. If he was wrong, it was to appease me about something. One of the craziest things was you know, I literally, when I would, you know, call, say I'm coming home from work, I could tell by the tone of his voice whether it was going to be a good night or a bad night. And you know, it's like, you don't know who you're going to get, because when it's good with a narcissist, it's really good, but when it's bad, it's really bad. And so I would just like almost dread, you know, making that call, because I had to then mentally prepare for what I was going to go home to. And with narcissists, it really is a lot about power and control. And they find ways to do that. And they're so good at being manipulative. I remember so many arguments where then at the end of it, I felt like I was the one apologizing. I somehow felt like I had done the wrong thing for whatever it may be. Excuse me. And I really felt like the crazy one, so much so that I started journaling every one of our like negative interactions just so I could remember things, because he would twist and use my words against me or say something and I was like, wait, but I don't remember. Well, maybe I did. I don't know. Like, and that's called gaslighting, where you twist someone's perception around. Um, and and especially for us empaths, one of our greatest strengths is that we're so caring about people. It's also one of our greatest weaknesses, our kryptonite, if you will, when it comes to not putting our feelings and needs first too. And so that was very much me at the time, and my role in this, my error became not speaking up about things anymore, because I just didn't want to deal with the fight. I didn't want to deal with being vulnerable and expressing my feelings about something and then it being used against me later. So I just wouldn't, and
That
so,
that is part of the control right there, though.
yeah,
That's what happens over time, is that control where essentially you just shut down because you're walking on eggshells. You never know. Whatever you say, maybe it'll be fine. Maybe that time you
yep,
say something, no matter what it is. And so you shut down and you lose yourself. And the other thing, I just wanted to go back while you're talking about, based on the voice. When you heard a voice, you would
yep,
know which way the
yeah,
night would go. Did you ever recognize facial
yes.
expressions?
There's,
Because the reason for that, and I didn't understand this, was through my experience, there would always be these different facial expressions that I didn't think much at the time, but then remembering back that there were moments of these very different facial
yeah,
expressions. What it was is because they
yep,
lack empathy, they can't actually smile or make proper
mhm,
facial. They don't know how to make certain expressions, so that's why they come
yep,
out looking different. And that's something
yep,
I'll always remember.
yeah. And so there was almost like a hollowness in the eyes. I could tell, it was very much, yeah, that a disconnect there. Um, and so on that note too, part of how if you're dealing with a narcissist, and it's one of the biggest parts, is that lack of empathy, that lack of compassion for other people, the unwillingness even to hear and accept someone's feelings about things, you know on top of the grandiosity, self-entitlement, because people are like, well, what is grandiosity? Well, they feel entitled to things. They feel that they deserve. None of us really deserve much of anything, but they do. And yeah, the malignant narcissists are the ones that you really think of when you think of a narcissist. The covert ones are more of the victim to everything. And let's see what she was saying. Yeah. Yeah, even when you're not saying anything, they can make something out of it. Yeah, you're exactly right. Yeah, the misinterpretation of things, the twisting things around, really good at that. And that's what makes it so hard. And so for me, the as his depression got worse, and that's the thing with narcissism, it's usually we call it a comorbid disorder. There's usually another type of diagnosis, typically, whether it is you know, some sort of mood disorder, or because depending on the types of delusions that they live in, there could be something else going on, some addiction, schizophrenia, things like that. But as all of that got worse, um, the his what became his big source of control over me was this suicide threats that would happen. And you know he could never get a job that was good enough for him, and that turned into these existential crises at night about how much God probably doesn't even exist because his bad deal, and why would he do all these things to then it turned into, well, you're just a bad wife, and berating me about things too. Well, then I just shouldn't be here anymore. And then when I would ask him to get help or whatever, he said he would say, no, I know it won't work. I can't be helped. I know what's wrong with me. So he was too good, essentially, to be helped, in a twisted backwards way, right? And then it turned into, well, I was just going to tell someone, but then if I did, then he would kill himself. And he would go so far as to get mad, grab the keys to his truck, and drive off to make me think that's what he was doing. And then, come back and be some sort of sob story. Yeah, lots of mind games. So eventually, and I'm just gonna hit the highlights here so I can get to the other stuff. But eventually, I have 2 older brothers. I ended up calling my oldest brother, and I told him what was going on, and he was like, Mandy, this is emotional blackmail. And I was like, oh my God, it totally is. And so he came down to help me. And basically, we were demanding that he go get help somewhere. And we were going to take him to this treatment place. Um, and my brother drove about an hour down to my house and showed up. And my ex was not happy at all. And, my brother's really, really good. He's been through some stuff himself, so he's really good at identifying what's happening. And he was like, Mandy, because he finally convinced my ex, like, either she's going to leave or you're going to go, there. And so he grabbed his stuff, but then he started, making a scene. And my brother was like, so he's going to go through the 5 stages of grief really fast right now. He's going to get angry, then he's going to sob. And he did, like, he did go through all of those things. Essentially, I told the place what had going on, his seemingly attempts to want to kill himself. And I mean, I thought that would be enough to admit him. But whatever he told them, they ended up not. And I felt stuck, went back home. So I was at a point where I was like, okay, I'm gonna start therapy myself. He's not, and I was having, like, I mean, I think I was probably crying myself to sleep like 5 out of the 7 nights a week. It was bad. And the anxiety was bad. Nightmares were bad. I'd have, just very bad nightmares that I'd wake up and he'd be dead, things like that. And so I, started seeing the therapist. And, at this time I'm a young therapist, young in the field. And I'll never, and I had to get over my own shame and my own self around being a therapist, going to therapy. Like, even though I'm totally an advocate for it, because that's what I do, but it was just this, like, why am I here? And I'd been to therapy before I was a therapist, but it was just this, I was already so insecure because of everything going on. And this guy was great. He was so good. And I remember picking a male therapist purposefully, because I really was like, okay, I need a male's input on what's going on, because I feel like I'm going crazy. And so we started working together. I was tracking everything with my journals, and all of that. And we started a plan for me to make a bag, like, in my car. Because it was also getting worse. Like, he was now throwing things. It was starting to get kind of physical and stuff. And started making a plan to, if I just needed to leave and go somewhere for a night, I could do that. So I remember it was a Sunday night, and I don't even remember how it started. All I remember was just this huge blow up fight about his life, his bad deal, all the same things, only very much exaggerated. I remember I was completely frozen. So looking back, my fight, flight or freeze was activated, completely frozen. And I was having the thought, just move your body and get out. Go grab some clothes and go. Like, I was telling myself this, but my body couldn't move. It was completely just paralyzed with fear and anxiety for what was going on. And I ended up not going. I remember like just lots of tears, woke up puffy eyed. I was supposed to meet my coworker um, to talk about our work stuff or whatever for breakfast that morning. I almost canceled and I didn't. Broke down, told her what was going on, and she was like, well, because four of us who formed the group, they knew some of what was going on, and apparently they were about to like have an intervention with me because they were like, you need to get out of there. And she was like, just stay for one night with me. And the thought of telling my ex, I'm not going to come home tonight, was so terrifying, for lots of reasons. And I finally had the courage to say, I need a break for a couple of days. And, I'm not going to come home till you start to get help, and so that was a terrible conversation. That was a Monday. He had made an appointment to see the person who I was seeing, which was fine because we were supposed to do couples counseling together that Wednesday. And so this was the kind of the big changing point for me. He got done with his session and came home, or he was driving back home, called me. I asked him how it went, and he was like, "Oh, it's fine. When are you coming home?" And I was like, "Well, tell me about it. How did it go?" And I'd already decided I didn't feel safe coming home until we had met together with the therapist and come up with a plan. And so I told him I wasn't going to, and just yelling and screaming over the phone, I hung up on him. Someone else in the office was there. The play therapist and her husband, told them what was going on. And the husband was like, I really feel like we need to get out of here. Just had this like gut feeling. So I left to go my coworker, and I get a call about an hour later from my ex's mother. And I could hear this like screaming in the background, and she was like, "You need to come home with him. He just totaled his car." I was like, "What is going on?" Apparently when he knew I wasn't coming home, so he's losing control now, right? He's losing control over me. I'm standing up. I'm asserting myself. Goes to my office looking for me. He drove this big white pickup truck. And when I wasn't there, and I don't know how they got there. His mom and dad, if he said something to them on the way, so they got in the car, or if he called afterwards or what. But there's a big wood line at my office, and so he decided to go through the grass, back up, and then he head on drove his truck into a tree, and said that he blacked out. And so she calls me. He's totaled his truck. He's not hurt. He's now smashed his phone. He's really losing it. And I tell her, like, you need to call the police. And he's not stable. This is not safe. She's trying to convince me to come home with him. And I said I wouldn't do it. And for me, that was because a lot of it was threats and mind games. And then when he went that next level step of like, he's lost control and he did something that I didn't think he would do, because he was really good about putting on the image to everybody else. And when as he decomposed over time, with me, I would see all this stuff, right? And so the fact that he did something that was sort of like out in the public was surprising. So, after that, and there was lots of lying about drug use and other things going on that, like a lot of gaslighting when I would question, like, are you using anything? And he'd be like, no, but I could clearly like smell something. He's like, no, that's coming from the neighbors. Like, it's just all this crazy stuff that's like, oh my God. And essentially, we did therapy together for about 6 weeks. He got on medication, all this stuff. Decided to, when I felt safe again, decided to go back home, see how that went. And essentially everything went back to the way it was. It slowly started to, he was on his best behavior for maybe like 2 months. And then I caught him in a pretty big lie, and that he was like hiding some drugs in the house. And I remember I was supposed to go kickboxing that morning. So, because it was a whole lot of gaslighting going on, and I was like, "Damn it, I'm not the crazy one here." So I go into investigator mode, and I like search the basement, and sure enough, and so I went to kickboxing class, and then I went back to my friend, my coworker's house, and then from there worked with the therapist on how to leave, and then that's when things got really bad, and he got really out of control. You know, to the point where I had to change passcodes and passwords and all of this stuff. And even after the fact, after the divorce happened, there was for about a year, there was attempts to try to communicate with me and all of that. And I had to very strictly, I only would communicate with him through the attorneys. It was something about that, but that's kind of a nutshell version of my story. And so, when you're detecting a narcissist, I tell people, feel like you're walking on eggshells. You don't know who you're going to come, like what version you're going to get. These are all traits, that lack of empathy, fantasies, grandiosity, sense of entitlement. They are pathologically insecure people. They are so insecure that their need for admiration is so great that they have to maintain a certain image. They have to appear to be a certain way to the world. And so that's why they're so likable at first, and you can get sucked in. And it looks like several of you from the chat. Yes. So no, he never talked about, so the question is, did he ever talk about one of his parents being that way? He never talked about it. But the joke always was, his mom's the one who wears the pants in the relationship. And his mom seemed to be more of the controlling one. After living with them, when we had to financially go and live with them for a while, I can totally see that she has very high narcissistic traits. I was super uncomfortable with the way she even talked to her husband, and the control and the micromanaging. I'll never forget when I moved out, when I left home, but I needed to come back to get some stuff. And so the saddest part, not the saddest part, but in all this, is that we had a dog. Thank God we didn't have kids. I was fortunate enough to, well, not fortunate. At the time, I was diagnosed with premature ovarian failure. I was told I'd never have kids. And I grieved that, and I was sad, but also I think subconsciously I knew I didn't want to have kids with him. And weird things were happening, like I was losing my hair and all this other stuff. 2 months after I left for the final time, all my biological stuff resolved itself. My hormone levels came back. I got, my cycle back, like all of these things. Hair started growing back. So it was stress. My body was like, hell no, you're not, reproducing with this person. But we had a dog, and that dog was my buddy. He was a big 120-pound Rottweiler. Loved him. He would use the dog to manipulate me because he knows how much I love that dog. Well, I went to go grab some of my things. And I was so excited. It'd been weeks since I'd been able to see my dog. And I go in through the garage, and, he's a big Rottweiler. So the door from the garage into the kitchen that had windows. So he jumps up. I can see his face. I'm like, Titan. And I go to unlock, and the locks had been changed. And it was still my house, and I found out later that him and his mom had changed the lock. So that was a long side note on the fact that he is very much a version of his mother, which is probably why he developed such low self-esteem and insecurity. And then from there, the narcissism just grew and developed, probably for lots of reasons. But so I learned that with protecting yourself from narcissists, you have to set boundaries and you have to follow through with them. That was very hard for me. And it wasn't until I really had the courage that first time to give myself permission to take a night or two away, that I really got some clarity on my rights as a human. Like, I have the right to not be talked to that way. I have the right to not be treated that way. Like, I have the right to, not feel guilty about saying no to sex. I have the right to all of these things that it was like my rights have been taken away from me and I didn't even know it. But I had to get removed from that environment to really see things differently, and to start to surround myself with people who could support me, and get their take on what was going on. People who I knew would be ones that I could trust with my story and who would tell me truth about it. Like the same person who would say, yeah, Mandy, no, that was probably you, be able to call me out on my stuff. And just because I felt so like unsure of what to do. But setting boundaries is key. Trying to reason with a narcissist is like talking to a brick wall. There's not much reasoning with them because they're always right. And they don't care about your feelings. And so for so long, I would just try to explain, like, why am I not enough for a wife, to make your life happy. It was always about these grandiose things that he didn't have and his bad deal and stuff like that. And, and I would try to encourage him and console, and it was just none of that would happen. And the thing too is that they're part of their own power and control is their great gift at deception. But they are so good at deception, they're so good at telling lies, that I truly believe, and this is just my opinion, they actually believe there's a level of self-deception there that comes out, that gets developed. Like, so if narcissistic people are pathologically insecure, then one of the things you'll see them doing is they will exaggerate all of their attributes, all of their awards. They will even say things about their life that may not be true just so they can seem a certain way, to where they start believing those things. So they develop this disordered self-deception of who they really are. And so then, even if, like, most of us, if we got caught in a lie, we'd be like, oh, and we feel shame and we feel bad, and then just kind of cower and say I'm sorry and hope you get forgiveness. But for them, they believe them. They believe their lies. They think they're right, to the point that they go to extreme measures, which is why they are so dangerous. And so you have to be very clear in your boundaries. And, like, if you talk to me that way, I'm leaving. I'm going out for the day. I'm gone. And narcissists you can find them in all types of people. It's common to have narcissistic bosses. You might have a narcissistic parent, narcissistic friend or sibling. Like, these can exist anywhere. I think intimate relationships are more tricky. But boundary setting and following through with what the consequences is super important. And keeping things simple. I work with a lot of kids who seem to have a narcissistic parent, whether it's the mother or the father, and the parent will try to argue with them in these really toxic ways of creating shame. One thing that narcissists do is called triangulation, where they will pit two people against each other and make one of them kind of be like the narcissist ally. And you'll see this a lot with parents and siblings of the golden child. And then, you have the black sheep, and they will try to pit them against each other. And so, I always encourage, with their significant other, or friend, to, when they start to create drama and start to fight or argue or whatever, just give very short, very casual responses back, almost like you're bored. Like, didn't think of that. Oh, okay. Nope, don't know what you're talking about. Like, really, because narcissists feed off of their fuel, the narcissistic fuel, their supply is to drain you, is to get your attention, is to get that drama. Yep, they live for that attention. You're absolutely right. And so if you're not giving that to them, it'll get worse for a moment and then they'll back off. And so you want to not elevate with them. You want to keep yourself as calm as you can. One of the strategies I used to use, and I share this with my clients a lot, is imagine there's a bubble around you when you're dealing with the toxic person. And whatever they say, whatever they spew out their mouth at you, you just imagine it going splat, like right on the outside, and just observe it. Because that's where, the bubble is where, you are and where you end and they begin. And those words don't have to come in. And then you can think to yourself, I wouldn't say this out loud, but you can think to yourself, that's the narcissist talking. That's just the narcissism. That's just the manipulation. That's just the whatever it is. So you can kind of detach yourself from it. Because what will happen is that they're really good at ruining your day, ruining your week, whatever it may be. And so I would be like, okay, this is the narcissism. Or if it was like really depressive talking, this is depression talking, whatever it was, his mood doesn't have to be my mood right now. And I would just kind of, in my mind, detach from that, shift gears, and then set my boundary for myself. These are not the people you go to for support. If you want to talk through something, go to someone who actually can be supportive to you. You really have to begin to engage with that person almost like it's a business transaction. And that sounds cold, but it's not, because they don't care that you're hurting. They don't care. And yeah, and being as objective as possible. You really have to treat it like, this is what I'm doing. This is why, and let them do whatever they're going to do. Really set those boundaries. And then, healing from this is a completely different ball game. I know for myself, healing from this required, me to be in therapy, me to, luckily for me, I was in it while I was in therapy. So I could track towards the end of it, I could track what was going on and start to see things more clear. And I, and then after that, I had to, I did my own EMDR therapy. I'd formed a lot of negative beliefs about myself, and that didn't get triggered again until I fell in love again. And, I swore I'd never get married again. I dated some here and there. Actually, my fiance now, we had gone on a couple of dates, and then I was like, I cannot do this. I was like, I can't trust anybody. One of my favorite parts of my story is, I ended up, telling people I was looking for a place, couldn't afford much. I was living with my colleague and her husband, but I really wanted my own place. And so one of my good friends was like, oh, my parents have this basement apartment, you can just stay there. I was like, well, can you ask them, and have you talked to them? And throughout this time, the word redemption kept showing up everywhere. I don't know if any of you have had those experiences where just this word is, or some sort of I don't want to call it a sign, but it's there. And it was very clear. It was coming out of my clients' mouths about things it was appearing other places. And in my mind, I'm like, I do not want redemption with him. Like, like, please don't let it be that, you know? But I didn't know what that meant. And so, you know, I go to this apartment or this basement apartment, and I was like, I just don't want to feel trapped. Like I will be grateful for anything, but like the being in a basement also kind of, I don't know. And it was beautiful. Had these tray ceilings, windows everywhere. You know, it looked out over this river in the back, and this was a family who I knew from high school. And I told them what was going on, and they were like, "Well, just so you know, 3 days before our daughter came to us, we had already decided that we wanted to use our space downstairs for someone in crisis." And essentially they were like, $300 a month for utilities, and you can stay there as long as you need it, fully furnished. I mean, because I left with nothing. I left with my clothes and some of my grandmother's stuff. And no, I did not get my dog back. She was asking that question. I still grieve over that. But it was a tie to him that I couldn't have. And he was very good at using the dog to manipulate me, that I had to let that go. Yeah, thank you. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this. You know, their son had just gotten married, and so he had all these dishes for me and stuff. And I couldn't. I wanted my first day there to be when I officially told my ex I wanted a divorce. And that was on August 1st of 2015. And I told him, I had some friends drive me to the counselor's office. I told him there at the therapist's office, 1, for my safety, and 2, for his safety. I didn't want him being told without someone present. Because even if I had told him like over the phone or something like that, I'd be worried about what he would do to himself or someone else or me, or something like that. So that I had to end up excusing myself because he was losing it in there. But so the day that place was available was August 1st. And it was like everything started to align. And so, me, I'm like, well, let me think about it. It's like nothing to think about. But I go to a park and I go on a walk, and then it hits me. They live on Redemption Drive. And I was like, oh man. I was like, God, you're so good, and it was just this like, when you have the courage to start to take care of yourself and put yourself out there, and you become more in alignment with yourself, like things happen, there's good out there. And when you get out of the toxicness, you can be a part of it. And so from there, my healing really began. Like I never lived on my own before, and so meeting people again and, learning to trust again. And so that tying into when I started, dating again. Like, I mean, I remember one time I did something wrong with turning the washing machine on at their place. And they said it was fine. It wasn't a big deal, but I was like, they don't mean it. Like, I mean, this is how bad my trust issues were. Like, couldn't believe anything anyone said. People were always gaslighting me. And so I'm going on dates. I was like, I can't do this. And, but, we reconnected, and we've been together 3.5 years and are engaged. And he's been great. I started doing a lot of my own work again because I was being so triggered by being in love again. And so by getting with a therapist and working through those things, and he would join me some. And yes, and that's a good question, Jill. Jill asked, were you worried you'd be attracted to another narcissist? Yes. And I, in my EMDR sessions, which is a trauma therapy that I'm trained in now, and I also done myself, I had to come to terms with, okay, well, what would I do if these traits started appearing, because they're going to be on their best behavior. And I knew that I came up with a plan, and I knew that I would survive. I would get out a lot sooner. If I spotted red flags, I would say something, because part of my thing is I would, even if I saw something that bothered me, I often wouldn't speak up about it or be like, that's not okay, because to spare the other person's feelings. And so that was, I had to heal in my part of my responsibility of not being true to myself and allowing those things to happen. And so, in my own work, I really work through, well, I would survive, I would get out of it, and I would, you can't go through life not ever trusting, because there's no way to truly ever trust. I mean, to know everything about everybody. But I've, you know, learned that I have to fight for the kind of, not even when it's a willing, empathetic person, it's really not a fight, but I have to speak up about the kind of relationship I want, and I have to be that too. So that's going to require me to be vulnerable again. That's going to require for me to be open again. And that's scary as hell, and so, you know, healing is definitely possible. And just because you've experienced, narcissistic relationships before doesn't mean you have to repeat those patterns. If anything, once you become very aware and you do your own work around it, you can spot them a lot easier. So yeah, that's kind of my story, and detecting, protecting, and healing in a nutshell.
Thank you so much for sharing. There's one thing that I think a lot of people don't understand is not only if you've gone through this, do you have to heal from the
Mhm.
relationship with this other person, but then you have to heal from your
Yeah,
own wounds because of what were open, which is the reason why you were in this
yeah,
type of relationship. There's almost like two healing
yep,
sessions.
yep. There was a
Yeah.
belief that had been formed before this relationship that I wasn't good enough. And so from that, I very much became a people pleaser, you know? And so my insecurities, when they would act out in their unhealthiness, would be people pleasing, or you know, doing, going above and beyond, things like that, just so that I could feel like I was liked or I was important. And so those behaviors were driven by negative beliefs. So now I find myself in this relationship with someone who I'm still engaging in those behaviors. So I'm now trapped as well in the sickness of it. And so really healing from, what was going on even before all of this happened, because those negative beliefs, like I'm not good enough, I'm a failure, I'm responsible, I'm not important, I'm insignificant, I'm defective, whatever they are, um unless you've gone back through and reprocessed and healed from that, they just show up in other experiences in life, and reinforce them. And so, part of my work and my work with my clients is identifying those negative beliefs, um, and doing intensive work around, making those not feel true anymore.
There's actually almost a third part of healing on this, and it's a mind fuck. Is that you are grieving something that actually didn't
Yeah,
exist, because you're talking about somebody who has a false
right,
self. So there actually not was never actually a real relationship, because you're not with somebody who actually has
right.
empathy.
The idea of them.
So you're grieving something that actually
Yep.
wasn't there, and that alone is
Mhm.
that's a trigger right there to get
Yep,
past.
absolutely. Yeah, we grieve our hopes and dreams. We grieve what we expected from the person. We grieve that shiny veneer that looked so great that never really
It
was.
didn't exist. It didn't
Yeah,
exist. So you're grieving something that didn't
yeah,
actually exist.
yep, absolutely.
And I think, and Mandy and I had this conversation. I think we were on live a couple of days ago. Um, but I don't believe there's any regrets with you.
Yeah,
I mean, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but I think everything that happened, I think you're
mhm,
grateful for, because it led you here to
yeah.
where
I
you
am
are
now.
today.
I am now. I now I get excited when I get clients who are going through something like this. I'm like, oh, it's my wheelhouse. But I had to do my own work. Otherwise it would have been triggering. And that it's not fair to me, not fair to my clients, things like that. And so I wouldn't see couples for a while. And I was very conscientious about that. But when you do your own healing work, and because I had so much shame around it, I didn't want to be divorced, especially growing up in a very traditional Christian home, that was a no-no, and God bless my parents. Like they helped me so much through all that, but there was a lot of shame around it. I didn't want to have to check that box that said divorce. I didn't want to have to do all these things. And so, but for me to do my own healing work means that I don't carry that shame anymore, which now I am grateful that I can use this to make me a better therapist and a tool to help heal other people. So in that sense, yeah. And I'm grateful that I'm a different person now too, that I went a stronger, more resilient route. It didn't always feel that way, but there is gratitude now. If you had asked me that about 4 years ago, no gratitude, none at all. But yeah.
I do want to open up for questions, bring people on live. I just want to mention one thing though, because I think this is really important for everybody to understand, and whoever's watching the replay also, is that these people are master manipulators, and so they could even manipulate a therapist. So if you are ever going to go to therapy for something like this, make sure that your therapist specializes in NPD, narcissistic personality disorder. Somebody like Mandy, who's not only a therapist but specializes also in this type of training, or else they can easily just manipulate right inside.
Yeah.
Therapy.
And the statistic is like 6 point something% of the population has NPD, and we're not even talking about people who have narcissistic traits, which is 1 in 20, something like that. So you're bound to come across them.
Does anybody have any questions? They'd like to come on live. You can turn your camera and mic on. Ask Mandy any questions you have. We have a safe space here, free of judgment, interactive platform. So anybody who like to ask something, please ask.
So the question is NPD more common in men or women? I haven't done the research on that, but I don't think that there's a gender component to it. I think it can show up more in men with the more covert narcissism. I'm sorry, more overt narcissism, because they have more testosterone, and so naturally can be more dominant in that way. I see way more women having overt narcissism, where they're the victim to everything, where they do the guilt trip as manipulation. I see a lot more of that in women. That's a good question. Anyone else?
If not, how can everybody get a hold of you?
So you can follow me on my social media handles. Instagram is therapist_Mandy. Therapist Mandy on Facebook. You can find me there. And Mandy Morris LPC on LinkedIn. You can find me there as well. And I do have a TikTok.
Which is how we met.
Yeah. With a little short therapy tips. And they're Mandy's _therapy tips. So, and I have a new website coming out, mandythetherapist.com. One of my first courses that I'm going to be offering as soon as I'm ready to have it up is going to be on these difficult relationships and how to detect them, protect yourself, and heal from them. So that will be up there shortly as well. And I have a chapter in a book that's about to come out that I go through a very specific tool on that you can do from home for helping heal those negative identities that are formed from these bad relationships. I talk in a little more detail in the chapter about my story, and then I give a tool at home that you can use. And so pre-orders for that will be going up on my website here this week as well.
Thank you so much, Mandy. This has been great. I appreciate your vulnerability and
Thanks for
everything.
having me.
Um, Jamie says, thanks for telling your story. Jill,
Thanks.
thank you. Thank you, everybody who's joined in today. Anybody who missed, this will be on the replay. Thank you so much,
you.
Mandy. Enjoy your day,
good
everybody.
to see everyone. Bye.
Take care. Bye.